We now have three panels that are going to dig in substantively to the white paper report, and we're going to hold questions on the entire white paper till the end at 11:45. Our first panel is on deterrence and resilience.
So my name is Beth George. I'm a former Department of Justice National Security Division, former Deputy General Counsel of DOD, and now partner at Wilson Sonsini here in Silicon Valley. I want to start by saying I'm so excited for this center because having spread between DC and Silicon Valley, there is two separate conversations going on in this country, and they're not connected. And I know that a number of think tanks have tried to bridge this and have not done it so far. I'm very hopeful that Stanford's going to be able to do that. So you have a great group of policymakers and people from the Silicon Valley doing this. I think that this is an excellent start. I will say this is only tempered by a little bit of disappointment that I had that I'd be moderating a panel this morning. And it's not the only panel today, which I'm also disappointed in. And this is in no way to impugn the people who are on the stage right now. I know particularly Alex Stamos has been out there promoting women in security. The Obama administration, the people that I worked for were women and people of color at the top levels of security and tech, both sides and in combination. So I just look forward to and challenge Stanford to reflect the diversity that is the cybersecurity community, not to seek out people, but to know that there are people working here that are diverse. So with that, I want to put that behind us and move on to this incredible panel. So Andy Grotto has the dubious distinction of serving in both the Obama and Trump administrations. Unlike the rest of Obama appointees, he was not fired. January 20th at noon.
Was that an oversight?
So, and had the distinction of working in the National Security Council, like the senior levels of cybersecurity, really an amazing viewpoint to be doing this work. Chris Painter was coordinator at the State Department on cybersecurity, very much seeing and interacting with all of our partners, both friendly and not so friendly, but still partners on cybersecurity. And then of course, Alex Stamos, who I believe needs no introduction in Silicon Valley in any room. So this is a great, panel to be talking about deterrence and resilience. And one of the things that sort of really struck me when this was happening, when this first happened, and Congress started calling up all the tech companies and asking them why they hadn't stopped this type of foreign infiltration of their services, was that tech lobbying must have been incredibly effective, because suddenly, for the first time, Congress believes that software is the solution for everything, as we believe in Silicon Valley. While those of us who are former government officials really think of deterrence, and particularly nation-state on nation-state deterrence, as the province of the government. So I want to just start out by saying, what is the role of government, and how does the government interact with other nation states to deter and limit their behavior?
So maybe I'll start with that. And I actually stayed over for the first 6.5 months of the Trump administration too, which was an experience. Glad I did. But I'd say that if we look at this whole report, there are lots of great recommendations in this report. But I view this issue of deterrence as a linchpin, because even if we do all the other things that we recommend, which are critically important, even if we shore up our defenses, even if we do things to try to make it more difficult for the Russians or other nation states to do this activity, at the end, we know they're going to do it again. And one of the problems with us failing to deter in the past, and frankly, we've been terrible about it. We, not just the Trump administration, but the Obama administration. The Trump administration, as Mike said, it really starts at the top, where we have this equivocal, at best, messaging from the president, and you need really strong messaging. But we also have an imposed cost on Russia or other adversaries, and that not only has an effect in not deterring them, but it encourages them to come back and do it in the future, and it encourages others to do that too. So part of the solution has to be, no matter what else we do, is making sure that they understand that the costs are high for this, and there will be consequences if they do this. And we have not communicated that in any way, shape, or form. And part of that is us not self-deterring. For us to do it, and I think we did self-deter in the Obama administration. I think we were afraid of consequences. I don't think we worked it through. There are things we can do, and we can do much more tailored than we have in the past. We're starting to do some of those things now. We're not really doing it as a comprehensive plan. And the key thing, and you mentioned this, and this comes from my old State Department position too, is we should do it collectively with partners. We should do it with like-minded partners who are also being victimized in the same way we have, and we've seen this all over Europe, to work together to try to impose collective costs on these adversaries and make sure they understand that this is the cost if they do it again.
So I think that's a great sort of laying the foundation for you, Andy. So can you talk about, to the extent that it's not classified, what we have done? What has the U.S. government done to impose any costs on Russia, and what's left on the table that hasn't been considered?
Yeah, so I think we need to look at the Russia election interference not just as a sort of isolated kind of battle over election integrity. We have a much more complicated relationship with Russia that has numerous dimensions, ranging from their actions in the Middle East, energy policy, the list goes on and on. And so, in the first instance, I think we need an integrated Russia strategy, right? That looks at the full spectrum of grievances that we have with Russia, and identifies the right policy tools in our arsenal that can adjust and change their behavior. I'll add a quick point to what Chris said, which just to maybe draw out why cost imposition is important. One of the real challenges in I think in this area is offense has an asymmetric advantage over defense. So just to put kind of a finer point on that, if we fortify our defenses along the lines of what we recommend in the report, the offensive side of the equation will still have lots of opportunities to cause harm. So that's why deterrence by denial and deterrence by cost imposition need to be integrated, as we've tried to do in the report.
Can I just add that this has always been the case. When I was a prosecutor, you could talk about locking your windows and doors, but if there are no consequences and the people break in, they're going to come, and they're going to come stronger. And I think that we need to do that. And one of the proposals we made, one of the recommendations, goes to this risk aversity and making sure we're being more forceful in this. And I think that's an important recommendation too.
Yeah.
So let's dig a little bit deeper though into this. So why was the Obama administration so risk averse on what were their fears of the consequences of acting in this area? I think both domestic politics would be important, but also sort of the role that we play in the international community.
I mean, you've heard this. Actually, some of former Obama administration high-level ones have spoken. Dennis was one, but also former DNI Clapper said that they were worried that Russia was holding things back, that Russia would do more, that we live in a glass house. We're far more dependent on cyberspace than Russia is. Now, Russia's getting there, and China's getting there, certainly. But if they really unleashed all their weapons, there's a fear that, God, this is going to escalate out of control. Now, there are ways to control escalation. There are ways to have communications paths, and this is another thing we recommend in the report. There's ways to do tailored strategies, tailored to the adversary you're dealing with, another thing we recommend in the report. There's ways to actually have that communication path, and we have some of those paths, like the hotline we set up with Russia that Mike was involved in when I was at the State Department, which is using the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center, which was used for its actual nuclear hotline. There are ways of making these communications work through military intelligence, law enforcement, diplomatic, and other channels. And if they start overcompensating, then we can pull back. But if we don't take the step at all, we are holding ourselves in abeyance in a way that just encourages them. So the entire world becomes worse.
And the other I think dimension here is that, and this is a point that we kept very high on our list of principles at the White House, which is understanding that Putin's objective, in part, was to undermine Americans' confidence in the integrity of our democratic institutions. In addition to supporting one candidate, that we want to be very careful not to do Putin's work for him, right? By taking action that actually potentially reinforces this narrative that there's something fundamentally wrong with our democracy and our election infrastructure, right? So, there's this vicious cycle that we were very concerned about touching off that also served as kind of a break.
That's true, and frankly, this is not a threat we saw coming. The cyber guys, if there's such a thing, it sounds like it's something out of Doctor Who, the Cybermen, we're focused on women. We're focused on this idea of infrastructure attacks, theft of intellectual property, like what the Chinese did. We were focused on these more traditional things. We never really thought about this hybrid attack that would attack our democracy. And when it happened, I think we were caught kind of behind the curve. And it took us a while to generate how do we respond. we went through lots of exercise, and Andy knows this, of coming up with different options. But I don't think we had the political sophistication or even understanding. And this is another thing that goes beyond all the issues we're talking about. Cyber is still this boutique issue. When you go to policymakers, high-level policymakers, and Obama got it and he cared about it, and he set up the Cyberspace Policy Review, which I was on when he came in. He cared about this issue, but he wasn't an expert at it. And you see this comparison of Theresa May after the Skripal poisoning, where she was able to get a whole coalition of people to act very quickly, blame Russia, and then take action within a week and a half. For some of the cyber activity, it's taken 6 months at a minimum. And so we've got to make that closer. We need to make this a more political mainstream issue and not this boutique issue. Yeah.
So to push just a little bit on, I think sort of following up what Mike was talking about at sort of the end, particularly with the divide in the political realm. So you have a president who's completely unwilling to acknowledge what happened or take action. What has surprised me as someone who worked in national security was a Republican Party, who's normally sort of the stalwart of the anti-Russia, tip of the spear, also not acting there. Is there a realistic policy that's sort of a bipartisan push that could come out of, say, Congress for consequences for Russia?
Yeah, I think there is. I think, there's sort of two dimensions to the newfound love of Russia among certain parts of the conservative political spectrum. Part of it is, I think, just some of the ideological affinities that I think Mike did a good job laying out. The other, and so I think that's a minority, though, still. I think that's a very, vocal but influential minority within the conservative movement. I think you had this silent majority that is essentially terrified that if they speak out, Trump will kneecap them. And so a lot of this, I think, has to do with the man at the top. And in a different political environment where, a figure like Trump was not in the position he's in, I don't think we'd see. I think we'd see a lot more willingness on the Republican side to hit the Russians.
One of the things I loved about this issue is, for the 20-some years I've been doing it, it's been a bipartisan issue, right? This has not been a Republican or Democratic issue. Russia has changed that to an extent, the election interference. It still is largely a bipartisan issue, but on some of these issues it hasn't been. But I do think there are things Congress can do. We mentioned the Deter Act, for instance, in our report. No legislation is perfect when it's drafted. We have some comments on that, but at the same time, having a regime which really targets mandatory sanctions and not things where you send the wrong message. Like I would argue with Deripaska, there was a real issue when you removed the sanctions, for instance, and it sent the wrong message at the end. That really go after the things that matter to the adversary. In this case, Putin. What's going to change his calculus? And make it so it's more difficult to just ratchet it back on a political whim. So there are things that Congress can do. There's oversight Congress can provide. There's this new Solarium Commission that Congress has set up to look at how we can better protect ourselves in cyberspace. There may be some running room there. There's certainly things they can do. But you're still constrained. If the president is not taking it seriously and not making it a priority, that's a problem.
All right, let's talk a little bit about resilience. My background originally in national security was in counterterrorism, and I feel like very much we spent all of our focus trying to stop the bombs from going off, and very little of our focus saying if a bomb goes off, it's not going to change the policies or the peacetime efforts of the United States. One bomb can't make a war. So let's talk a little bit about resilience here. What does resilience look like and around this particular issue?
Yeah, I think we have to focus on resilience because, to echo what Chris said, this problem is going to be with us forever, right? The truth is that the Russians attacked fundamental parts of our society that we enjoy and celebrate, such as freedom of the press. We don't have an official Secrets Act. We don't have the ability to legally block people from running with emails. It's not the UK where you can get these court orders on certain information can't be talked about. We don't license people to use social media like people do in China. And so we will always be vulnerable to outside ideas being injected into our intellectual sphere. There is no way around that. And so we are going to talk about some things that can change in the amplification factors of that, but to assume that there will always be an ability for multiple adversaries to have some kind of influence, I think we there's a number of people who are like real professors here. I'm learning that adjunct is Latin for not really a, right? A number of people, real professors here, talk about the idea that we're going through an information revolution that is not dissimilar from the creation of the printing press, especially in its democratizing power of breaking the monopoly of effectively the Catholic Church in Europe, of controlling what is the collective memory of European societies. Much more so than radio or television, which is actually a consolidating power, that you had to have tons of money to control radio and television, that were spreading the power of speech out. And the printing press led to hundreds of years of war in Europe. And we're going to have to kind of cut the corner on our society becoming adjusted to the fact that we have moved beyond a gatekeeper society. And when I was a young person, like a bunch of the undergrads here, the big kind of progressive thing on campus, one of them was media consolidation. We were all worried about the fact that a handful of corporations were ending up controlling the media. Well, this is what you get when the media isn't controlled by corporations anymore. You get a situation where people can pick and choose their information sources. They can sort themselves into these closed information loops, and they have the ability to have a number of ways they can economically support people who a number of us would consider bad actors in the information environment, but who have that right of speech. And so we're going to have to move to a world where people can be inundated with all of these different messages and hopefully pick and choose based upon what they think, people who are actually treating them intelligently and not manipulating them. And that's going to be a tough transition, because the truth is everybody likes to have their priors reinforced. And as much talk as there is from people who are not happy about what happened in 2016 about echo chambers, there's just as much echo chamber on the left, and I think that's actually, the echo chambers on both sides have been amplified since 2016, and that we've moved to these ideological corners where you can have a complete media consumption diet that never ever questions any of your prior assumptions. And so I think we're moving in the wrong direction on resiliency right now. We're probably in worse shape for 2020 than we were in 2016 in that case. But hopefully we can move to a place where individuals, it's going to have to be an individual responsibility to make these decisions yourself.
Although I do think we made some progress in protecting the actual electoral infrastructure itself. I mean, we have a long way to go, but DHS has been doing some good things. It's great. They need to do a lot more.
Right. I mean, there are things in here that like on that, the companies have done a bunch of things.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the
agree.
vulnerability of us as a society to disinformation attacks, I think is worse, honestly, than it was.
And I agree with you. I think there are two components to this. There's one, how do you protect the election systems themselves? And there's a lot of work on that. And there's, election infrastructure ISAC now. There is a information sharing and advisory committee. There is a global norm that's being promoted that we'll talk about in another chapter that talks about don't attack the electoral infrastructure of any country. There's a lot of things on that sort, but that's less really than half the battle. I think it's really also what the influence operation targeted, and that I think we're not there.
And one of the problems is some of these are some pretty basic problems. The ability to break into the Gmail account of a grandfather and then leak the email, that's not going away, right? Like, and that is like this weird. I mean, we're sometimes I wake up and I'm like, we are living in the like bad parts of a William Gibson novel, right? Of like, this isn't, it's not the Jetsons, and it's not nuclear holocaust, but there's something like in the middle of like all of the possible timelines that were towards the negative side. And one of them is like, you have people like John Podesta or Colin Powell, both of whom were hacked by the Russians, who incredibly important people plugged into the entire political scene. They leave the shelter of professional IT and security folks, and all of a sudden they are now responsible for protecting their environment on like their unpatched Windows XP box that their grandchildren gave them. Like protecting those kinds of folks, like the fact that those people are basically national security assets is one of those fundamental problems that we can get a little bit better on, but we're never going to solve. And so having a media environment where you're always going to be able to selectively choose from the email of grandparents and then leak it out is the kind of thing that we're just going to have to be able to live with. And that's what we have some recommendations for the media too on this, because that is a under-discussed component of this. Is the truth is that the mainstream media got completely played by the Russians, massively amplified their messages in 2016, and have been very effective at pushing responsibility onto other folks for that, and not really kind of re-examining just because something is true, does that mean you run it 24/7 on cable news if you believe that was leaked specifically for the benefit of a foreign adversary?
Well, and part of it's recognizing the technology is not either good or bad on itself, it's how people are using it. And I remember when Hillary Clinton gave her first internet speech, it was the internet, yay. And her second speech was the internet, because there's lots of bad things going on. We have to treat those seriously and not think of it as a panacea. And I think we're at that stage now. but there's a lot more we got to do. And I personally think you're never going to get the grandfather. The grandfather will go away before the problem goes away. You know, we all will go away before the problem goes away. So you need to move that up the stack and really have a way to remove that security element from those. And that's a lot of research around that, and hopefully that will happen sometime.
So I am tracking that we have like 2 minutes left, and I'm supposed to keep us on time. I want to open it up to questions in the audience.
We were actually going to do questions
Oh.
for all the panels at the very
So we're not doing questions for the audience. So I get to keep asking questions.
You're the audience now.
I was trying to help you guys out here. Okay, so let's just for the last sort of piece on the sort of craziness for those of us who worked in sort of the infrastructure that is the election infrastructure. Since we're covering this, can you sort of lay out how all of the disparate pieces and how they don't interact with each other, like so the state level sort of election, the federal election, like the complications that we have there, that I think is the nightmare for any CISO to try to manage.
Yeah, so our system of elections is decentralized, just to put it mildly. Elections are administered by state and local governments. The federal government has some authority to dictate certain requirements, but they are limited, and there's all these like quirks in American law that actually make it affirmatively hard for the federal government to intervene, right, in a crisis. So, for example, there's a law in the books, I think it's from the late 19th century, that criminalizes law enforcement presence under certain circumstances at polling places. And we spent weeks when I was at the White House working with DOJ to try to figure out, okay, like what if there's an incident, how do we send can we send in an FBI forensic team, right, or not? I mean, basic stuff like that. Now, on the other hand, the fact that our infrastructure is decentralized is a source of resilience, right? It's harder to scale a threat across the entire country if we're talking about tampering with a voting system or a registration database. But as I think Mike did a good job laying out, when you're talking about slim margins in an election, an attack may not need to scale across the entire country to have real effect.
And I don't think we should, I'm less worried, and I think you guys share this, on actually throwing the election, right? I think it's going to be a rare circumstance like we faced in this last
hard,
election,
yeah.
where you have the ability to actually change the votes in a way that throws it. Throwing the election into chaos is almost trivial. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, the answer
That
to
was our main concern
right,
in 2016.
is that, like, the truth is all the Russians or any other adversary, and by any other adversary, when we talk about the election security stuff, you're now talking about, you're not just talking about kind of the top tier adversaries. You're talking about a huge number of nation states and a number of private organizations that probably have this capability.
and domestic political actors
domestic
who
political
have
actors.
learned this playbook now. which
Although I
is-
say
Right.
that list is
All
growing,
they
too.
would have to do is open the door a crack, and the lawyers from the DNC and RNC would put the crowbars in there and rip it open, right? Because, like, if you could just create the idea that something was thrown, you immediately would have, every private jet in the country booked up for all the election lawyers to be flying into, middle nowhere county.
hanging chads on steroids.
Painting chads on steroids, and with the ability with the electronic stuff to perhaps do so in a way that is very, very difficult to have any kind of real forensic paper trail in a number of countries or states. So we have 6 states, I believe, left, where if you do some of this stuff, perhaps it is very, very difficult, and you're talking about months and months of litigation before you come to an
And that's why one of our recommendations is for a paper audited.
And that's, there's been litigation about that, and that's really important. But I also think you only have to, as you said, create the impression of the elections not being reliable. I mean, we because we believe they're reliable. If you can create that doubt, then people will question the election, whether it's factually true or not, right? So it's like the movie The Conversation, if you remember this, where Gene Hackman plays this private investigator, and he thinks someone's planted a bug in his house at the end. It's a very old movie, so I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone, but then he rips his entire house apart looking for this bug that's not there. It's that same idea that if you take away the confidence, you've undermined our election system in total, and that's one of the things we were worried about before, and I think we need to be worried about that again. So when we address these issues, we have to address it in a positive way too. We have to say we are bolstering the resilience of our election and not call into doubt whether or not it's reliable.
And right now we're trapped in this vicious cycle where the good news is we're talking about debating how to improve the integrity of our democratic process. The downside is that we are debating how to improve the integrity of our democratic process. We need to figure out a way to have that debate in a way that doesn't, again, do the Russians work or any malign actors work for them.
Well, I think it's fine to have the debate as long as then you do something.
Right.
If all we do is talk about how bad the elections are, and then we don't actually fix anything. And there are people working on this, so I'm not going to call them out, but this can be like your little spy thing. You can try to figure out who this person is. But the point person for Department of Homeland Security on elections is standing in the room right now, so you can try to do a little LinkedIn action on that. And so there are some great people who are working on this problem, but the problem is they have no power, they have no funding, they have no ability to enforce these rules across the 10,000 different authorities that run elections in this country. And so as long as we decide that every county, that like the CIO for Cayuga County, Ohio, right, which is one of those maps that the CNN guys love to throw up on their screens every, at one of these critical places, or Miami-Dade or something like that, that their CIO has to go up against a colonel in the GRU or the SVR. That is a absolutely ridiculous expectation, like of just laying out the chess pieces, right? That we're having their queen and their rook go up against two of our pawns. That's how we're going to set up the board. That is a losing proposition. So one of the only ways out of this is that we have people with the capability. We have to empower those people to actually be able to fight.
Right, and that goes full circle back to the deterrence. So, we can only do so much in protecting the networks, and we need to do all we can. But then we absolutely have to go after the people who are attacking them. And if they continue to attack them, they're going to have some success. They'll change their TTPs. They're, all the things we're doing, they're looking at what we're doing. So we need to be able to make it too costly for them.
All right, so I think you guys have a break coming up. I will tell you that I told the panelists they need to disagree with each other to make the panel interesting. I think you guys managed to do that while still building consensus.
Are you forcing us to say something bad now about the others?
No,
I don't like your shirt.
no.
Wow.
I like it.
All right, so I'm going to cut this off before it goes downhill.
I actually like it.
If you have not read this, it's really worth the read.
I haven't read it yet. Our grad students did a great job. That's an academic joke.
And I think you have a break next. There's coffee or something somewhere, and back in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Beth.
Appreciate it.